You canceled the plan. You said you were tired, which was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is that by Thursday afternoon, something in you had quietly started counting down to the moment everyone would leave, the house would go still, and you wouldn't have to perform being fine for a single additional person. You weren't miserable. Nobody did anything wrong. You just needed everyone to go away for a while, and you needed it the way you need water, not as a preference, but as something your system was actively running low on. And then, because you're wired the way you are, you probably spent some portion of that alone time wondering if something is wrong with you for needing it this much. There isn't. But the reason why is more interesting than most people tell you. The standard explanation for needing alone time is introversion. You recharge alone. Extroverts recharge with people, personality type. It's just how you're built. That explanation is accurate as far as it goes, which is not very far. It describes the what. It says almost nothing useful about the why, and it completely skips the part worth paying attention to, which is what your specific need for solitude is actually trying to do for you, because it isn't one thing. The pull toward being alone is doing several different jobs simultaneously, and depending on which one is running loudest on a given Thursday, what you actually need from that solitude is completely different. The first job, and the one most people are vaguely aware of, is sensory and cognitive offloading. Every interaction you have costs something. Not emotionally necessarily, just computationally. You are tracking tone, reading faces, calibrating your own responses, managing the gap between what you actually think and what it's useful to say out loud. Even with people you love and conversations you enjoy, part of your processing capacity is running in the background, doing all of that continuously. Solitude turns that off, not the rest of you, just that layer. And for some brains, that layer runs hotter and uses more resources than others. The relief of being alone isn't antisocial. It's the relief of a system that has been working very hard finally being allowed to idle. The second job is harder to name and considerably more important. There is a version of yourself that essentially goes offline when other people are around. Not because you're performing exactly, though sometimes that's part of it. It's more that in social space, you're always partly oriented outward. You're responsive. You're adjusted. Even when you're being completely authentic, you're still a version of yourself that exists in relation to whoever is in the room. Solitude is the only context in which that stops, in which you're not the version of you that responds to anything. You're just you, running without input. And for people who live primarily in high-demand relational environments, parents, caregivers, people in service roles, people who are emotionally load-bearing for everyone around them, that baseline unresponsive self has sometimes been offline for so long, they've quietly lost track of what it actually wants or thinks when nobody's asking. The alone time isn't withdrawal, it's reconnaissance. There's a concept in psychology called ego depletion, the idea that self-regulation, the management of impulses, presentation, emotional response, draws from a finite resource that gets spent across a day. The research on the specific mechanism has been contested, but the underlying observation holds up in everyday experience. There is a version of you at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday that makes worse decisions, has less patience, finds conversation more effortful than the version of you at 9 a.m. That version needs something that isn't more input or more connection. It needs the absence of demand. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some people's need for alone time isn't primarily about recharging. It's about emotional processing that they can't do in front of anyone, not because they're hiding it, or not only because of that, but because the processing itself requires a kind of internal attention that the presence of another person interrupts. You cannot properly think through something unresolved while simultaneously tracking how you appear to be doing. And for people who are acutely aware of how they're coming across, who find it almost impossible to fully decompress while being observed, the alone time is less about rest and more about the specific and non-negotiable need to just be inside an experience without managing how it looks from the outside. People who grew up in environments where their emotional states were inconvenient for others, where expressing a feeling too loudly or at the wrong moment had social cost, often develop a very particular relationship with solitude. Alone is where it's safe to be whatever you actually are. Not because the people in their current life would punish them for it. Many of those people are gone. But the habit formed early, in the body, before there were words for it. The room to yourself isn't just pleasant. It's the context in which you are least likely to be any version of wrong. That pattern, processing privately, staying regulated in front of others, is functional up to a point. Past that point, it creates a quiet problem. The internal processing that was supposed to happen in the alone time starts getting deferred and redeferred because the alone time isn't quite long enough, or it gets filled with distraction, or the exhaustion of the week means you spend the solitude recovering rather than actually arriving at the things that needed attention. And then you are technically never alone, but also never actually processing anything. Just managing, indefinitely. This is the thing worth sitting with. If your need for alone time has been growing rather than staying stable, if the amount of it that feels sufficient has been quietly increasing, if you've noticed that you come back from social situations more depleted than you used to, that isn't just tiredness. It's a signal. Something in your daily operating conditions has been drawing from a reserve that isn't getting refilled. The solitude you're craving isn't a personality trait showing up louder. It's your system telling you that something in the current arrangement isn't working and has not been working for longer than you've been willing to say out loud. The solution isn't more alone time in the sense of simply scheduling more of it, though that may be part of it. It's taking seriously what the alone time is being asked to carry. Rest is one thing. But if what you actually need is uninterrupted space to think, to feel something through to its actual end, rather than managing it back below the surface, to remember what you actually think about something when nobody is in the room to orient toward, then that's a more specific requirement than introversion, and it won't be solved by a quiet evening that you spend scrolling. You already know some of what needs the space. The things that have been sitting in the background, the things you've been too busy or too observed to actually look at directly. The alone time you've been protecting so carefully isn't actually about getting away from people. It's about getting back to something, a specific and quiet part of you that doesn't speak up in rooms full of other people's needs, that waits, patiently and without complaint, for everyone to leave. It's been waiting a while. It probably has something worth hearing.